Friends, welcome to Sunday School. I'm Father Jonathan, joined by my friends that I'll introduce in a second, and just so glad to be with you on Halloween, All Hallows Eve, Reformation Day. You name it, it is it. It's a lot of things today. Good to be with you as we gather. Now we usually do an as we gather kind of like fun question kind of thing, but I have a more serious as we gather. This is if we had like dramatic studio music. There would be like all right, so Betty and Terry and Marcia, you'll have to be my dramatic studio music. After what I say, I need like like one of those. I didn't do it very good just then. Like, you know what I mean though. All right, so this is the last class in our series, being disciples.
Oh.
Perfect, beautiful. You're hired. You passed the audition, and next week, we start a new 2-week series. It's just a little bit of a class before we get into the Advent season. And I'm really excited about this 2-week class. It's called The Bible for Beginners. And so the Bible for Beginners is just a way to say, the Bible is this book that very few of us are truly kind of beginning from scratch with. We've heard we've heard stories, or we have memories of stories. Maybe some of us read it every day, but there's a sense in which there's always some part of the Bible, at least for me, that I'm kind of avoiding a little bit more than the other parts because I don't feel as comfortable with it, because the names in that section are a little harder to say, or, some of that history. Do you have to be a history major to keep track of the exile timelines and all that kind of stuff? So then I keep a distance from that part, but then like, give me Jesus, not just because that's my favorite part, but because that's the part I feel comfortable with. So we're going to do 2 weeks, the Bible for Beginners. So as we collect ourselves today, anticipating that class that will begin next week, what is a question? This is for you to put in the comments as we collect and gather this morning. What is a question you have about the Bible? What is something you hope that Bible for Beginners will make room for? Because it would be a gift to you as you read and engage the scriptures. So good morning, and that's the question for consideration today. What about the Bible would you like to know a little better? I used to have a Bible study leader who would put it this way: if there was an expert in the room, what would you like to ask? And it did two things. It made room for our questions, but two, it said, ask your question, but I'm not promising to answer it. Because maybe I'm not the expert either, but it actually turns out that when we share our questions, we find lots of good things together. So, hey, good looking Karen Morrison. It's good to see you. This is Karen joining us on YouTube or Facebook this morning. Facebook, I guess. Are there parts of the Bible that y'all avoid? Because I know this isn't a fair question because I didn't flag it in advance, but are there parts of the Bible that y'all avoid because it's like reading Russian literature and you can't even say the names in your head clearly, so it just like gets stacked on top? I say that I love Russian literature. It just drives me crazy. Like every character has 4 nicknames and they're all unpronounceable to me, and sometimes I think the Bible can feel that way, or it's just really long, or I just encounter it and I'm like reminded of all the times I haven't encountered it. So there's just like, I have to process through my guilt before I get to the stories. All kinds of reasons that it becomes a bigger chore than it maybe could be. But
Is he addressing us?
I think so.
Are you addressing us, Jonathan?
sorry, I did a really, if y'all have thoughts on that, I didn't flag that in advance though.
All the begets. I always
Yes, the
remember
begets.
I'm like, who cares?
Well, you just skim right through it.
Yes.
The thing that hangs me up is when they're detailing how many cubits each is going to be, and I'm trying to visualize that in my mind. And then when you actually see like the models of it, you think, oh, that's not what I had thought at all. I'd be a terrible architect.
Well, you've got all these measurements that are maybe obsolete, maybe not, depending on what culture you are in now, and all that. And I remember Annie one day, she graduated from she didn't graduate. For Christmas one year, Dad gave her a Bible that wasn't a children's Bible for the first time. And she was very, very excited about this. And she was like, Dad, I'm going to read it just cover to cover. And I was like, hey, babe, you read it cover to cover if you want to. I don't want to talk you out of it. I just want to let you know that in the thousands of years that people have been reading the Bible, folks have also found it helpful and fruitful to read it in other ways too. So you can jump around. And I suggested some of the different ways she could do that. And she's like, Dad, you just mind your own business. I'm going to read this cover to cover. And I was like, cool, just keep me posted. Let me know how I can support you in that. And she gets somewhere to middle of Leviticus, wandering in Leviticus. And she says, Dad, I'm not sure I'm going to make it. And I said, well, so, and of course it's Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, the first 5 books. So that's the 3rd book in. So I said, what's the deal? What's hanging you up? And she's like, Dad, did no one give them a proper editor? He's like, it's so redundant, and the holy spaces, like it's just like layer on layer on layer, and she was not impressed. She thought they could have been aided by a grammar teacher and an editor, which is not entirely unfair, but anyway. So that's what we'll be getting our feet into, getting our splashing in the creek of next weekend after the Bible for Beginners. All questions fair game, no answers promised, but hopefully we'll be able to provide some structure and framework so that we can access even just like one part that we have found a little harder to access in the past. Today we are finishing up our class, Being Disciples, and we were just checking in, and I want to formally introduce our panel, our guests today, Marcia, Betty, and Terry. Thank you for being here. We were checking in before we came on live, and I was hearing just a lot of gratitude, and a lot of gratitude for this last chapter, and a lot of things to which y'all indicated you'd be returning. Also, maybe I'll start with you, Betty. A lot of highlighted ink in this chapter, but
Yeah.
So if you, and we'll come to some of the larger takeaways that y'all flagged earlier, but if Betty, we'll start with you. In like a 20-second overview, what were some of the gratitudes you had from this chapter with life in the Spirit?
Well, I think it reinforced a lot of what I think about, and it opened me up to a lot of new thought. And I'll echo what Marcia brought up as far as when he talks about creating happening now, not in the past.
Mm.
And I thought it was just a wonderful synopsis of how to bring everything that's gone on before in the book to a head.
Yes. So the constant creating, which we'll have an opportunity to explore in a couple minutes with Rowan's own words in a short video. The 4, what did he call them? Building blocks of discipleship: self-knowledge, stillness, growth, and joy. Marcia, were you surprised at all by that list? As at the beginning of the chapter, he's like, here are 4 building blocks, and then he kind of unrolls them as we go along. Were you surprised by that list, or did it seem like, yeah, I expected that?
No, I think a lot of it wasn't brand new concepts, but presented a little differently, but I think when he said, fruits of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, long suffering, but what are you doing? He says, what are you doing with that? You can say, oh, the Spirit indwells me, and I know I've got some of these spiritual gifts, but if we don't stop and let God show us, where we're going with this, then we're just really kind of reiterating a lot of just knowledge maybe we got a long time ago. But and I think stillness is hard for all of us. I am not good at stillness.
Yes. The stillness doesn't come easy for very many of us. I think you're spot on right there. He made to your point about the spiritual life, and he says he's going to be rude. If that's rude, like Rowan Williams being rude is the sort of like baseline for it. It was just funny because I didn't think he was especially rude, but he said he was going to try to pick on the word spirituality, because spirituality sort of suggests like a bunch of esoteric practices out here. You get this like spiritual high, the dopamine is running through you and all this kind of stuff. And he said it, rather than spirituality, he prefers to talk about life in the spirit, which immediately, instead of sort of abstracting a portion of your life and calling that spiritual, your whole life is being baptized in the spirit. Your whole life is being claimed by Christ in this way. Terry, I'm curious, how did that distinction strike you as you ran across it?
Well, Betty read the chapter before I did, and I think the ultimate praising of this chapter is when she says, I'm going to keep this in my nightstand and read this chapter at least once every week for the rest of my life. Oh my, I really need to pay attention to this. It's a wonderful chapter.
It sort of, I'm struck. One of the things I'm struck by is it sort of turns upside down how a lot of us were raised to think about faith, where it's about certainty in certain way. But as soon as he says, it's not about this realm you become an expert in, it's about submitting the whole life to Christ, and then going around, as he flagged in the first chapter, with attention and expectancy. It's almost as if that relational life with God is cultivating those habits necessary to keep us able to be surprised and to not know, and to go around with that childlike wonder and delight. And I love that the last building block is joy, because I think joy is something that would surprise folks, that is so integral. I think of joy before I think, my pre-thoughts about joy are kind of like, well, joy should just be a byproduct of a good day, right? I feel, but he talks about it as really integral. It's one of the ways you recognize disciples, of this joy they carry, and it's a gift. You were mentioning, Betty, one of the helpful tensions that he sort of untangles. We're kind of striving for these things, but it's not really our work. But there is a sense in which stillness and self-knowledge and all of the rest, one of the goals of all of this is to be people who are capable of joy, which maybe, Marcia, is just as difficult to, or just as important not to take for granted as stillness. I used to say, the campus of UW-Madison, you see all these thousands of people walking by. They all have their earbuds in. Nobody's making eye contact. And a smile in that context could, like a true from your being smile in that context, could be a really subversive act. Because joylessness kind of goes part and parcel with busyness. There's never enough. I'm on to the next thing. Don't take time to celebrate all of that. And he's very much in this chapter trying to slow us down, I think.
Oh, I think so. I think that especially the self-knowledge and the stillness really are foundational. And it's hard to have that relationship. It's hard to hear him calling your name, as he talks about, if you can't be still and let go.
Mm.
It seems like for a long time, we've been trained to be busy in everything that we're doing. And multitasking is a wonderful thing. And we can get this done and that done. And it is a real eye opener to say, hey, wait a minute, just get out of your own way. Just slow down, walk and talk slowly. It reminds me, some of you are know Tom McKee. Wonderful man. And I was ushering for the very first time at a funeral. And I said, Tom, I don't know what to do. And he says, it's really easy. Walk slowly and act holy. It made perfect sense. Get out of your own way. Let God take over.
Yeah.
Well, Jonathan, on page 79 of our book, can I read a paragraph? Because to me, this was a paragraph of the whole chapter that stood out.
Please.
In it, self-awareness, in this rather alarming word, dispassion, are to do with developing some sense of our freedom from the projections, the expectations, the busyness that constantly threaten to hem us in. And we only really get that when, in our prayer and in our life generally, we make enough space to hear our name spoken by God. I'm not just talking about prayer as in my talking to God, but my being still enough to hear God speaking my name. When I come to prayer, saying to God, tell me who I really am.
Years ago, I did a log for 2 weeks of how I spent every day, every moment. And God really got a bum deal on that. I was so busy with everything else. And I realized that my spiritual life and my time with God wasn't anywhere near my busyness.
I think it's interesting and insightful too, that listening to you, Marcia, and that paragraph, Betty, that you shared, a lot of times I'm tempted to think of self-knowledge as this kind of invitation towards introspection, navel gazing, or whatever, getting lost in myself. But Rowan is kind of inviting us to consider that maybe you can't know yourself by yourself, right? It takes the community of believers, but it also takes that willingness to receive my identity from God, to open myself rather than kind of close in and feel like, well, I got to get myself squared away before I'm worthy of engaging the rest of the world around me. I've got to just sort of like trust. And it makes me think of an encounter in Austin at the Episcopal Student Center there with the Brothers of Taizé. They were doing a pilgrimage of trust and introducing the concept of Taizé prayer, which is a lot of silence, a lot of repetitive music, and short scriptures read in many languages. And we were getting ready to do a 30-minute prayer service. And the brother said, now some of you are used to the Episcopal prayer book, so this might feel new and maybe a little threatening, but I want you to think about it. And I want to walk you through what you can kind of expect more or less. And he was talking about, the music repeats over and over. He's like, you don't know how many verses. And so you're going to be asked to surrender rather than live in certainty. And that might feel a little, just make room for that. It'll be okay. It'll be over in 30 minutes, even if it's a total disaster. But then someone said, well, what do you do in the silences? Because the silences usually last between 5 and 10 minutes. And they said, not just today, brother, but like you have lived in this community for over 30 years with three of these services a day. What do you do with all the silence? And he kind of laughed and he said, what a wonderful question. And as someone who has always been drawn to contemplative prayer, but never felt especially good at it, I kind of leaned in. I couldn't wait for his answer. And he said, in the silence, I sit and seek to be present to God's love for me. And if that is all I get to during the silence, that will have been enough. If there's more time, then like if that happens, then I will allow my love for God to bubble up in return. But my first call is to sit and rest in God's love for me and know myself again as God's beloved. Some people they suggest like doing like short mantras, and then for me, with sometimes slightly obsessive tendencies, I can be like, well, what if I pick the wrong mantra? I won't even know until after the end. It's like, oh my gosh. And it's like you were saying, Terry, like, get out of your own way. You can see the Spirit just being like, oh my gosh, Jonathan's a lost cause. Like, let's just move on. But there are no lost causes in the kingdom of God. And so to sit and know myself again as God's beloved, and for Betty and Terry and Marcia to hear, and then to begin to live a life that trusts that reality, God's love, is the most true thing about me. And so then I think it's the rest of life after that, and not after, because it's a continual thing, is kind of like the mouse that convinced Dumbo that it was the black feather that made him fly. The rest of life is learning to put down our feathers. We don't actually need them. Those weren't the things that made us lovable. That wasn't the thing on which our worthiness depended. And the thing on which our worthiness does depend can't be taken away. But I was thinking of Brother Emil and his conversation to those folks, because it was such a beautiful and simple observation about what that silence is for, and connects to an observation you made it before we came on, Terry, something from the book about presence, and how one of the things that it can be easy to obsess on is God present, or how is God present? But Terry, maybe you could share that line, either literal or paraphrased, where Rowan kind of pushes back on that some.
Which line are we talking?
Oh, what does he say? It's not that God isn't there when you pray, it's that you're not.
Yeah. So God's presence is the given. My presence is the one you got to worry about, because I can even look bodily like I'm in the room and be on a grocery list, or beating myself up for how I handled a situation with my kids the night before and how I wish I'd done that better. You got to really make sure I'm in the room.
Yeah, one of the following sentences after that is, so when are you going to actually arrive? When are you going to sit and listen, to stop roaming about and be present? And I find when we pray, it's oftentimes, you go, yeah, but I have to do the grocery list, and I have to, do this and this and that. Again, get out of your own way and just slow down and be still, and let the Spirit move you.
I want to bring on, here we go. Bring on next Rowan Williams. We've shared a short video in each of our classes, but we haven't heard from Rowan himself yet. This is a beautiful video where he talks about one of the things that you've heard Betty bring up, and Marcia and Terry, this idea that creation wasn't a one-time thing in the past that we are kind of grateful recipients of, but that we are continually created. We are continually named and called into being, which is the source. For Rowan, it sort of makes possible that the intimacy and vulnerability and love that we encounter in silence and stillness. And so this is just a chance also for us to hear the author we've been listening to or that we've been reading for some weeks now, and an invitation to hear other of his reflections in his own words.
Talking about what the church needs and what the world needs, because we tend always to reach for the big strategy we haven't yet thought of.
Right.
Oh, at last, we've got it. This is the method. And you can sort of see God go, oh, here we go again, when we do this. What the world most needs from the church is persons and communities who look as if they're grateful, who look as if they can cope with their anxiety and drop it, who look as if they're always ready to be surprised. And so often what the church gives off is the scent of anxiety, the smell of fear almost. Have we got this right? Have we got the right people here? Are we sure the wrong people are outside? And to me, the whole business of doctrine and worship in the church is not, here's the thing you sign on the bottom line with, but here's the overflowing of new understanding and new insight. It's so extraordinary, so big, we can't quite, we've got to try. It's not an exam paper you have to pass. It's the song you sing. And I think when people see churches, communities that really have that sense of surprise and newness about them, when they see worship that really looks as if something's happening, when they see side by side people you wouldn't see together anywhere else, then the message gets across.
What's tranquilizing to keep us getting past that tribalism you talked about yesterday to a place of a new understanding of being? And what does the Eucharist have to do with that?
Yes. I guess that one of the things that's at work here is this sense that whatever person I come across, in some sense God is giving, teaching, shaping me through that. God's the creator, we believe. And that means that God is, not just that God made the world a very long time ago, and that's very nice of him, but that moment by moment God's creating. So if God's creating me, it's not just that he sort of flicked a switch 66 years ago, it's that now he's creating me, today he's creating me. And part of the way he's creating me is the people he sends to meet me. And that's where I think the eagerness, the sort of glint in the eye comes from. I can't be content with my comfort zone. I've got somehow to open up to what I'm being given. Now, you asked about the Eucharist. It's funny this, isn't it? Because there are some Christians who clearly think the Eucharist is a slightly embarrassing thing. It's one of those ritual things that only certain Christians fuss about, especially Catholics and Episcopalians and oddities like that. Whereas, of course, it is the one thing people have done from the start. When Paul writes to the Christian community, he writes on the assumption that the one thing he knows they're doing is getting together to share bread and wine. Because that meal, that moment when everybody is on the same footing because they're all hungry, they all need the same thing. They all need of this presence of selfless love in the midst of them, actually crystallized in the bread and wine, really embodied in the bread and wine. And at that moment, I talked about it sometimes in terms of coming away from receiving the bread and the wine, looking at everybody else and thinking, well, it's like the Garden of Eden. We've all just started again. This is it. We've all just started again. And everybody is shining like the sun. And
not in the past. And part of the way in me is the people he sends to meet me. So much there. Marcia, what did you see or hear?
When he said it's not so much the people, whether you're separating people that are on the inside that are obviously trying to be spiritual, and people on the outside, keeping them out, that I guess collectively the importance is to be, how we're ministering to people and, not counting all our little spiritual acts we do as, kind of chalking that up with God, but it's what's actually happening with our lives.
Yes, it's what's actually happening with our lives. And one of the things that connects to to that for me is this idea that even the good things I think I'm capable of, even the days I get up and the first words out of my lips are some kind of prayer, and I march over to my prayer desk and do morning prayer. But even the things I'd like to pat myself on the back for are gifts of God. Like, they're all gifts. Like Augustine used to say, even my sins, even that is a gift, because now I've been given what I need in order to confess my sins. Like, there's just like, the psalmist says, in exasperation, I imagine this being prayed in exasperation. Like, where can I go to flee from your presence? Like, what can I do that is an altogether non-gift, that refuses the gift that, because I just want to be self-sufficient for one darn minute. And there's not. And there's not. And so when he talks about like receiving the gift, and I think that's part of the stopping and the stillness, is like this life that I was hell-bent on getting my good exam marks on, and instead I'm learning to say thank you. And that's and that's what we do as often as we gather around the table. The great Thanksgiving, I don't think is an accident.
And I think a lot of us have a lot of unlearning to do, so we can accept that, or embrace it more fully.
What's an example of the unlearning? I think you're right on.
Well, as far as like Terry was saying, so many of us are programmed to follow what society thinks is success, or just being busy and attaining these different goals, which don't mean anything really, especially when you get to an older age and you have more time to reflect. That isn't where you'd put your priorities, or at least not for me. But as far as what Rowan was saying in this video, the thing that I thought of as he was speaking was, with realizing that we're constantly being created, then each gathering is completely different, because not only am I being created anew at this point in time, so are you, and so are Marcia, and so is everyone else that we're dealing with. And that's a real blessing.
That's such a blessing, and like something that most of us need reminding of like so many times. Jude and I were out doing last minute Halloween costume shopping yesterday, because Jude was like, I thought like it's not Halloween yet. But you talk about like busyness. It's not just that the rest of the world has already moved on to like Easter or Christmas. They started having their decorations out 2 months ago, but like they were packing up their Halloween stuff yesterday. The stores, like, so Jude was like, I'm gonna have to do this earlier. But then we had a car kind of almost hit us in a road. We were safe, but Jude was reflecting on, he likes to think of himself in the driver he'll be, God willing, many years from now. And he was talking about what happened in that moment where that car didn't see. I said, it's just so easy to forget that you're always on a new road. There are no roads that you know exactly how it's going to go. Because and the reminder that like most, what is it, like 90% of traffic accidents happen within 5 miles of our home, because that's when we get tricked into thinking we do know everything about this road, but we don't know about the conditions today, or the reason that child is about to bolt from her front door and run out into the street. Like, we lose our capacity to be present as we make assumptions about our having mastered the information that will constitute a situation. So to go into a very familiar place and find something new and surprising, I think is just a wonderfully challenging and beautiful exercise for Christians. Like, anybody can go to the art museums and find something beautiful and spectacular, but can you go about your ordinary day today, and in one of those ordinary places, not counting like a surprise package someone mailed and dropped on your doorstep, but in one of those ordinary places today, can you find something that you would have to say, wow, that's been beautiful and true all along, and I'm only now seeing it? Or Jacob after wrestling with the angel. Truly, God was the Lord was in this place, and I didn't even know it. I didn't even know it. Terry, did you have any thoughts or observations with Rowan's video?
You know, I'm still trying to wrap my head around the fact that creation didn't end at Genesis. We're still doing it, and I am not the person that I was yesterday or last year. I find it amazing that everything is so evolving.
I think of the I don't know if it's a hymn or just a worship song that starts out, "Create in me a new heart, O Lord." So we're inviting him to come in and change us, create new in us.
One of the favorite observations of the early church fathers and mothers when they would read the scriptures is to see images of water and the Spirit, and to invite us to see those as kind of lining up. So in the creation, before creation starts, the Spirit is hovering over the waters, and then you have like the Spirit, Jesus in River Jordan being baptized, and the Spirit is there, and the early church is like, Spirit, waters. That's not just an identification of who Jesus is. That's an identification of what in Jesus is happening. It's creation all over again. It's new creation. This is new creation, and it's being ushered in on the world. It's this this beautiful new thing.
And Rowan brings up, he used the word overflowing, and he did that in the chapter about joy, that it's a sense of something overflowing, pushing outwards, and he referenced that to the water and the living water. What a beautiful way to put things.
Yes. So you've got this. We're being cultivated into people of gratitude, asked to put down our anxieties and what did he say? The smell of fear. I love that. They put down the anxieties and the smell of fear. We're being asked to be grateful, to count everything as new and a surprise, which raises all kinds of questions that we probably don't have time fully to unpack here. But like, if I thought that meaning came from my work, my ambition, my having it all right and put together, what is it? What, like, can you still be a Christian this way, or does you just get like turned into to a kind of lifeless lump of gratitude? I don't think that's at all the case, but it's an invitation to say, okay, so if I thought the work meant doing this, but now it's lived gratitude with others in community and kind of constantly being open to giving and receiving gifts that open us all to the reality of God in our midst. What does that change? I mean, Rowan asked it real simply, like worship that looks like joy overflowing. But doing that out in the world too, like those are some good questions for us to wrestle with. I think if it's not something for us to master, what does it look like to sort of faithfully be mastered by it instead? Well, we are at our time. I want to thank Betty and Terry and Marcia. I want to thank some of our other guests who have joined us over the weeks, James and Julia Broughton and Zoe Holmes. This has been an experiment. I was sharing before that we've never done this before, where you have a class in front of the class, and I just could not be more grateful for the insights and observations y'all have brought and for the conversation we've shared. Grateful for each of you, and we'll have to do it again sometime.
It's good.
It was great.
It was great.
Next week, remember, is the beginning of the Bible for Beginners, a 2-week class where we're just going to try to name all of the unpronounceable obstacles that keep us from wandering into those corners of the scriptures, we would like to know better. So bring your questions. You can email me questions too. That way, again, we're not promising any answers, but if there are some good answers out there, we have a half a chance of like getting them and have them ready to share with you when we get to our conversation time on Sunday. Take care, friends. Have a wonderful rest of the week, and God's good peace.